The thunder cracked like a bullwhip across the darkened Arizona sky, illuminating Zara Fletcher's terrified face as she desperately tried to control her panicking horses. The wagon lurched violently beneath her, the right front wheel catching in a deep rut before snapping with a sickening crack that sealed her fate in the middle of nowhere, 5 miles outside of Bisbee, Arizona territory, 1885. Whoa, easy now. Zara called to her team of horses as rain pelted down in heavy sheets, soaking her traveling dress and turning the dirt road into a river of mud. The animals whinnied in panic, their eyes wide with fear as another bolt of lightning split the sky. She fumbled with the reins, her gloved hands slipping on the wet leather as she fought to bring the wagon to a controlled stop before disaster struck. At 22, Zara had thought herself prepared for the journey west, but nothing could have readied her for the ferocity of an Arizona summer storm. Back in Boston, her father had warned her about the foolishness of traveling alone to the frontier, but after his passing 3 months prior, there had been little choice. The teaching position in Bisbee represented her only chance at independence and a fresh start. The horses finally stilled, trembling and snorting as rain streamed down their flanks. Zara climbed down from the driver's seat, her boots sinking ankle-deep into the mud. Lifting her sodden skirts, she made her way around to examine the damage, her heart sinking at the sight of the splintered wheel. "No, no, no," she murmured, pushing wet strands of copper hair from her face. She was miles from town with night approaching and the storm showing no signs of abating. Desperation clawed at her throat as she considered her options, finding none that didn't end with her spending a terrifying night exposed to the elements. Another flash of lightning revealed a distant shape on the landscape, a cabin nestled against a rocky hillside, perhaps a quarter-mile away. A faint light glowed from within. Shelter. Zara quickly unhitched her 2 horses, gathering what valuables she could carry in a satchel before leading the animals toward the cabin. The rain was relentless, driving into her face with each step as thunder boomed overhead. By the time she reached the small porch, she was shivering violently, her teeth chattering as she raised a trembling fist to knock. The door swung open, and Zara found herself staring up at the silhouette of a tall man, his face cast in shadow by the lantern light behind him. "Madam." His voice was deep, tinged with surprise. "Good Lord, you're soaked through." "My wagon," Zara stammered, gesturing weakly behind her. "The wheel broke in the storm. I saw your light." The man stepped forward, revealing rugged features beneath a day's growth of beard. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, quickly assessed her bedraggled state before looking past her to the horses. "Better get those animals under the lean-to," he said, grabbing a slicker from a hook by the door. "Then we'll get you warmed up before you catch your death." He moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to handling horses, leading Zara's team to a small shelter attached to the cabin. Once the animals were secure, he returned to find Zara still shivering on the porch, clutching her satchel to her chest. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside to let her pass. "Name's Daniel Lawson. Most folks just call me Dan." Zara entered the cabin, heat from the stone fireplace immediately enveloping her like an embrace. "I'm Zara Fletcher. I was on my way to Bisbee when the storm hit." The cabin was simple but neat, a single room with a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs and a cooking area. Rifles hung on the wall and a saddle rested on a stand near the door. It was unmistakably a bachelor's dwelling, but it was clean and, most importantly, dry. "You're the new schoolteacher," Daniel said, more statement than question as he hung his wet slicker by the door. "Town's been talking about your arrival for weeks." "Yes, I was expected tomorrow," Zara replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance, clothes plastered to her body, hair hanging in wet ropes around her face. Daniel moved to a trunk at the foot of his bed, pulling out a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers that would clearly swallow her whole. "These will be too big, but they're dry. You can change behind that screen." He nodded toward a folding wooden screen in the corner. "I'll make some coffee to warm you up." Zara hesitated only briefly before accepting the clothes with murmured thanks. The impropriety of the situation wasn't lost on her, but hypothermia seemed the greater concern at the moment. Behind the screen, she peeled off her sodden dress and petticoats, using a rough towel Daniel had provided to dry herself as best she could. His shirt smelled of soap and pine, the fabric soft from wear. She rolled up the sleeves and trouser legs multiple times before emerging, feeling both ridiculous and immensely relieved to be in dry clothing. Daniel stood at the stove, his back to her. He'd removed his vest and stood in his shirt sleeves, the fabric stretched across broad shoulders. He turned at the sound of her approach, and something flickered in his eyes before he quickly averted his gaze. "Coffee's almost ready," he said, clearing his throat. "Sit by the fire." "You need to get warm." Zara settled into a chair near the hearth, extending her hands toward the flames. "Thank you for taking me in. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't seen your light." Daniel shrugged as he poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone," Zara said softly. Her journey west had taught her that much. She accepted the steaming cup he offered, wrapping her fingers around it gratefully. "Will the storm pass soon, do you think?" Daniel moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to peer into the darkness. Rain lashed against the glass, driven by howling wind. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating his profile's strong jaw, straight nose, the furrow of concentration between his brows. "Not tonight," he said, letting the curtain fall. "These summer storms can last hours." "You're welcome to stay until it's safe to travel." The words were simple, pragmatic, but they sent an unexpected wave of relief through Zara. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Lawson." "Dan," he corrected, settling into the chair opposite her. "Mr. Lawson was my father." A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee, the storm raging outside while the fire crackled cheerfully in the grate. "So," Daniel finally said, "what brings a Boston lady all the way to Bisbee? Besides the teaching position, I mean." Zara looked up, surprised. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" A slight smile curved his lips. "Your accent, plus those fancy boots you're wearing aren't made for Arizona trails." Zara glanced down at her mud-caked boots, now drying by the fire. They were indeed impractical, with their decorative stitching and narrow heels a parting gift from her mother. "My father died 3 months ago," she said simply. "There was nothing left for me in Boston except memories and debt collectors. The teaching position in Bisbee seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The territory's good for fresh starts. That's why I came here myself 6 years ago." "From where?" Zara asked, curious about this man who lived alone in a cabin outside of town. "Missouri originally. Moved around plenty after the war." His tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate, and Zara didn't press. Everyone who came west carried their own reasons, often tucked away like valuables too precious or painful to display. "Are you a rancher?" she asked instead, gesturing to his attire. "Of sorts. I've got a small spread, nothing fancy, 50 head of cattle, a few horses, enough to keep me busy." He leaned forward to stir the fire. "I do some scouting for the army now and then when they need someone who knows the territory." The flames cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the small scar that ran through his right eyebrow and the weathered lines at the corners of his eyes. Zara estimated he was perhaps 30, though the frontier aged men quickly. "Tomorrow I can help you with your wagon," Daniel offered. "Get you into town proper." "I would appreciate that," Zara replied, "though I fear the wheel may be beyond repair." "We'll see. I've got some tools and spare parts. If it's too damaged, we can load your belongings onto my wagon." A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, making Zara jump. Daniel rose to his feet, moving to check that the shutters were secure. "Storm's getting worse," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He turned back, his expression concerned. "Are you still cold?" The truth was, Zara felt warmer than she had in months. The fire, the coffee, and perhaps the unexpected kindness of this stranger had chased the chill from her bones. "I'm much better, thank you." Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied. "You should try to get some rest. You can take the bed." "I'll make up a pallet by the fire." "Oh, I couldn't possibly. I insist," he cut in gently. You've had a rough day, and tomorrow won't be any easier getting your wagon sorted and settling into town." Zara wanted to protest further, but exhaustion was rapidly overtaking her. The events of the day, the terrifying moments when the wheel broke, the frantic trek through the storm, the relief of finding shelter had drained her completely. "Thank you," she said simply. Daniel busied himself gathering blankets and a pillow while Zara sat watching the fire, her eyelids growing heavier by the minute. By the time he had arranged a makeshift bed for himself on the floor, she was swaying slightly in her chair. "Miss Fletcher," he said softly. "Zara." She blinked up at him, momentarily disoriented. "Yes, bed's ready for you," Zara nodded, rising on unsteady legs. The warmth of the fire and the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof had lulled her into a state of near sleep. She made her way to the bed, settling onto the edge of the mattress. "Good night, Mr. Lawson," she corrected herself, "and thank you again." "Sleep well," he replied, his voice a low rumble that followed her into dreams of thunder and blue eyes as clear as the sky after a storm. Dawn arrived with gentle persistence, sunlight filtering through the cabin windows and casting golden rectangles across the plank floor. Zara woke slowly, momentarily confused by her surroundings before memory returned. She lay still, listening to the sounds of morning birds chirping, the soft clank of cookware, the crackle of a freshly stoked fire. Turning her head, she observed Daniel moving quietly about the cabin. He had already dressed for the day in a clean shirt and denims, his hair still damp from washing. He worked with practiced efficiency, preparing what smelled like coffee and bacon. Zara sat up, smoothing her borrowed clothes as best she could. "Good morning." Daniel turned, a brief smile crossing his features. "Morning, hope I didn't wake you. Coffee's ready if you want some." "Thank you." Zara rose from the bed, suddenly self-conscious in the light of day. The situation, a single woman spending the night in a bachelor's cabin, would cause a scandal in Boston. Even in the more relaxed territory, it risked her reputation, perhaps even her new position. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel spoke while pouring coffee. "I checked on your wagon at first light. The wheel's damaged pretty bad, but not beyond fixing. I figure we can get it repaired and have you in town by midday." "That's a relief," Zara said, accepting the cup he offered. "I was worried about arriving late on my first day." "School doesn't start for another 2 weeks," Daniel replied. "Plenty of time to get settled." Zara sipped her coffee, surprised by his knowledge of the school schedule. "You seem well informed about town affairs for someone who lives outside of it." A corner of his mouth quirked up. "Bisbee's still small enough that everybody knows everybody's business. Besides, my sister Jenny's boy will be in your class. She's been counting the days till school starts again." "Oh," the mention of family humanized him further in Zara's eyes. Not just a solitary cowboy, but someone's brother, someone's uncle. "How old is your nephew?" "8. Smart as a whip, but full of mischief. You'll have your hands full with Tommy." Daniel turned back to the stove, flipping bacon in a cast iron skillet. "Breakfast will be ready soon. There's fresh water in the basin if you want to wash up." Zara appreciated the opportunity to make herself presentable. Behind the screen, she splashed water on her face and used his comb to detangle her hair, twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Her dress from the previous day was still damp, but wearing it seemed preferable to arriving in town in a man's clothing. When she emerged in her crumpled blue traveling dress, Daniel was setting plates on the small table. "Your dress still looks wet," he observed with a frown. "You'll catch cold." "It's not too bad," Zara lied, trying not to shiver as the damp fabric clung to her skin. "And I can hardly arrive in Bisbee wearing your clothes." Daniel considered this, then disappeared into the lean-to, returning moments later with a worn but clean duster coat. "Wear this over top. It'll keep you warm and cover most of, well, it'll keep you warm." Zara accepted the coat gratefully. It engulfed her slight frame, but the dry warmth was worth looking ridiculous. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, the simple fare of bacon, biscuits, and coffee more satisfying than any meal Zara could remember. Afterward, Daniel hitched his wagon while Zara gathered her few belongings. The morning was bright and clear, the storm having washed the world clean. Puddles dotted the dirt road, reflecting the cloudless blue sky, and the desert seemed to breathe with renewed life, cacti standing taller, their spines glistening with lingering raindrops. Daniel led Zara to where her wagon sat abandoned, its broken wheel jutting at an awkward angle. He examined the damage with a practiced eye, circling the vehicle and checking the axle. "The wheel's split, but the axle's intact," he announced. "That's good news. I've got a spare wheel at my place that might fit. It'll need some adjusting, but it should get you to town." "You have a spare wagon wheel?" Zara asked, surprised. "Parts are worth their weight in gold out here. Never know when you might need something." Daniel shrugged. "Wait here. I'll be back in 20 minutes. While he was gone, Zara assessed the contents of her wagon. Most of her belongings had survived the storm relatively unscathed, protected by tarpaulins she'd had the foresight to secure before leaving Boston. The books she'd brought for her classroom had suffered some water damage along their edges, but were otherwise intact. Her trunk of personal items, clothes, her father's pocket watch, her mother's lace handkerchiefs remained dry, nestled beneath layers of protective canvas. True to his word, Daniel returned with a wooden wheel strapped to his saddle. He worked methodically, jacking up the wagon and removing the damaged wheel before fitting the replacement. Zara watched, impressed by his calm competence as he made adjustments with tools from his saddlebag. "There," he said finally, wiping his brow with his shirt sleeve. "It's not perfect, but it'll get you to Bisbee. I recommend having the wheelwright take a look once you're there. Mr. Jenkins is fair and won't overcharge you just because you're new." "I don't know how to thank you," Zara said earnestly. "You've been so kind." Daniel looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. Just being neighborly, anyone would have done the same. "Not anyone," Zara insisted. "Please let me pay you for the wheel and your trouble." "Keep your money," he said firmly. "You'll need it getting settled. Consider it a welcome to Arizona territory." Zara wanted to protest, but sensed it would be futile. Instead, she said, "At least let me repay you once I receive my first month's wages." Daniel's expression softened. "If you're determined to repay me, you can do it by teaching Tommy his letters properly. My sister would appreciate that more than any money." "I'll make sure he gets special attention," Zara promised. They loaded her belongings back into the wagon, working side by side in the growing morning heat. When everything was secure, Daniel helped Zara onto the driver's seat, his hands strong and steady around her waist as he lifted her. "The road into town is straight from here," he said, handing her the reins. "No more than 4 miles. You'll see the church steeple first, then the mining company offices." "Will I see you in town?" Zara asked, then immediately felt her cheeks warm at the forwardness of her question. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, surprise perhaps, or something more complicated. "I come in for supplies every couple of weeks, and for Sunday services when the weather's good." Zara nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to say goodbye to this man who had offered shelter when she needed it most. "Thank you again, Dan, for everything." He stepped back, touching the brim of his hat. "Safe travels, Miss Fletcher. Welcome to your new home." With a gentle flick of the reins, Zara set the horses in motion, the wagon creaking beneath her as it rolled forward. She glanced back once to see Daniel Lawson standing in the middle of the road, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun, watching her go. Bisbee emerged on the horizon exactly as Daniel had described, first the white church steeple, then the imposing brick building of the Copper Queen Mining Company, and finally the town itself, a collection of wooden structures clinging to the steep hillsides of Mule Pass. As Zara guided her wagon down the main street, she was met with curious stares from townspeople going about their morning business. A woman sweeping the boardwalk outside a millinery shop paused to watch her pass. 2 men loading crates outside a general store stopped to tip their hats. Zara had been given instructions to report to the mayor upon her arrival. The town hall was easy enough to find, a 2-story building with a small bell tower, situated near the center of town. Mayor Edward Wilson was a corpulent man with mutton chop whiskers and an elaborate waistcoat that strained across his substantial midsection. He greeted Zara with effusive welcome, clearly relieved by her arrival. "Miss Fletcher, We had begun to worry when you didn't arrive yesterday as expected. The stage brought word that you had decided to make the journey from Tucson by private conveyance. Yes, Zara confirmed. I thought it prudent to bring my own transportation, as I understand the school is some distance from town. Indeed, the mayor nodded vigorously. About a mile north, near Miller Creek. A lovely spot, though rather isolated. We've prepared the teacher's cottage for your arrival. Mrs. Holbrook, she's head of the Ladies' Aid Society, has stocked it with some basic provisions to tide you over. The mayor continued speaking, outlining her duties, the school schedule, and various town regulations, but Zara found her attention drifting. Through the window behind him, she could see the dusty Main Street, so different from the cobblestone avenues of Boston. This was to be her home now, this raw, unfinished town carved into the Arizona wilderness. Miss Fletcher, Mayor Wilson was looking at her expectantly. I apologize, Zara said quickly. It's been a long journey, you were saying? I was inquiring about your delayed arrival. Did you encounter difficulties on the road? My wagon wheel broke during yesterday's storm, Zara explained. Fortunately, I found shelter for the night and a kind gentleman helped repair the damage this morning. Indeed, who might that have been? Mr. Daniel Lawson, Zara replied. He has a small ranch outside of town. Something flickered across Mayor Wilson's face, an expression Zara couldn't quite interpret. Lawson, eh? Well, fortunate indeed that he was nearby. Before Zara could inquire about the mayor's reaction, he was continuing briskly. Now, I'll have my boy show you to the schoolhouse and cottage. School begins 2 weeks from Monday, which should give you ample time to prepare your classroom and settle in. An hour later, Zara stood in the doorway of what was to be her home for the foreseeable future. The teacher's cottage was a simple one-room structure attached to the schoolhouse by a covered walkway. Inside was a narrow bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and a bookshelf containing a Bible, a dictionary, and several worn primers. The mayor's son, a gangly youth of about 16, had helped unload her wagon before departing with promises that his mother would visit soon with a proper welcome basket. Left alone, Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the finality of her decision. She was here. In Bisbee, Arizona territory, 2,000 miles from the only home she'd ever known. The realization brought both terror and exhilaration. A knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Opening it, she found a woman in her early 30s standing on the small porch, a covered basket in her arms and a friendly smile on her face. Miss Fletcher, I'm Jennifer Lawson Parker. Everyone calls me Jenny. I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to welcome you to Bisbee. Lawson. Daniel's sister. Not at all, Zara said, stepping back to allow the woman entry. Please come in. Jenny Parker had the same striking blue eyes as her brother, though her features were softer, framed by light brown hair tucked neatly beneath a bonnet. She carried herself with the confident ease of someone comfortable in her surroundings. I've brought you some fresh bread, preserves, and a bit of stew, Jenny said, placing the basket on the table. First days in a new place can be overwhelming without having to worry about cooking. That's very kind, thank you, Zara replied, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. Your brother mentioned you have a son who will be in my class. Jenny's face brightened. Tommy, yes, 8 years old and too clever for his own good, I'm afraid. He's with my husband at the moment, or I would have brought him to meet you. She paused, tilting her head slightly. So you've met my brother already? Yes, Zara said, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks despite her best efforts. My wagon broke during the storm last night. Mr. Lawson offered shelter and helped repair the wheel this morning. Jenny's eyebrows rose fractionally, but her expression remained friendly. That does sound like Dan. He's always been one to help where he's needed. There was something in her tone, a careful neutrality that made Zara wonder if Jenny was making assessments of her own. He was a perfect gentleman, Zara felt compelled to add. A smile touched Jenny's lips. I never doubted it. Dan's many things, but improper isn't one of them. She began unpacking the basket, revealing a loaf of bread still warm from the oven, a jar of amber-colored preserves, and a ceramic pot that released savory aromas when uncovered. Now, you must be exhausted from your journey. Why don't you have some food while I help you unpack? Then I can show you around town, introduce you to some folks. Zara wanted to protest she'd already imposed on one Lawson and didn't wish to burden another, but the genuine warmth in Jenny's offer was impossible to refuse. Besides, having a female friend in this new place would be invaluable. I would appreciate that very much, she said sincerely. Jenny Parker proved to be as efficient as she was kind. Within 2 hours, she had helped Zara unpack her trunks, arrange her meager belongings in the cottage, and prepare the schoolroom for future organization. All the while, she provided a steady stream of information about Bisbee, which shops had the freshest produce, which to avoid due to inflated prices, which families would welcome her most readily, and which might pose challenges. Mrs. Greenwood fancies herself the arbiter of town propriety, Jenny explained as they walked down the main street later that afternoon. She'll likely invite you to tea within your first week. Accept, be polite, compliment her china, and you'll have an ally rather than an adversary. I'll remember that, Zara said, trying to commit all these details to memory. Boston society had its own intricate rules, but frontier social dynamics seemed equally complex in their own way. They passed the general store, the assayer's office, and a surprisingly well-appointed hotel before reaching a small cafe with gingham curtains in the windows. This is my husband's place, Jenny said with evident pride. Frank's Cafe, best apple pie in the territory, though I'm biased. Inside, the cafe was cozy and clean with half a dozen tables and a small counter. A tall man with sandy hair looked up from where he was wiping down the counter, his face breaking into a smile at the sight of Jenny. There's my girl, he said warmly, and you must be our new schoolteacher. He extended a hand to Zara. Frank Parker, welcome to Bisbee. Thank you, Zara replied, liking him immediately. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. Your wife has been extraordinarily kind in helping me get settled. That's Jenny, Frank said with a fond glance at his wife. Heart bigger than Arizona itself. Where's Tommy? Jenny asked, looking around the cafe, out back with Scotty Jenkins, looking at that litter of kittens the Martinez cat had last week. Frank turned to Zara. Can I get you ladies some coffee, maybe a slice of pie, on the house, of course. Before Zara could respond, the cafe door opened and Daniel Lawson stepped inside. He stopped short at the sight of her, surprise evident in his expression before he schooled his features into a more neutral arrangement. Dan, Jenny said, a note of curiosity in her voice. I didn't expect to see you in town today. Needed supplies, he replied, his eyes still on Zara. Thought I'd grab some coffee before heading back. Miss Fletcher was just telling me how you helped her during the storm, Jenny said, and Zara didn't miss the speculative look that passed between brother and sister. That was fortunate timing. Daniel shrugged, moving to join them at the counter. Just happened to be home when she came knocking. Frank set about pouring coffee for everyone, while Jenny excused herself to check on Tommy. Left momentarily alone with Daniel, Zara found herself suddenly tongue-tied, unsure what to say to this man who had shown her such kindness less than 12 hours earlier. How are you settling in? Daniel asked, breaking the awkward silence. Well enough, thank you, Zara replied. Your sister has been incredibly helpful. Jenny's good that way, he said with obvious affection. She's probably already introduced you to half the town and planned your social calendar for the next month. Zara smiled, relaxing slightly. Not quite, but she has been very informative about local customs and personalities. Did she warn you about Mrs. Greenwood yet? She did indeed. They shared a smile, and for a moment it felt as though they'd known each other much longer than a single day. The connection was unexpected but undeniably pleasant. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a small whirlwind in the form of Tommy Parker, who burst through the back door of the cafe with all the energy of an 8-year-old boy who had just discovered something exciting. Ma, Uncle Dan. He exclaimed, skidding to a halt when he noticed Zara. His eyes, the same Lawson blue as his mother and uncle, widened with curiosity. Are you the new teacher, Tommy? Jenny scolded gently, following him inside. Where are your manners? The boy straightened, attempting a more formal demeanor. Pleased to meet you, madam. I'm Thomas Parker. Zara couldn't help but smile at his earnest effort. "It's very nice to meet you, Thomas. I'm Miss Fletcher, and yes, I'll be your teacher when school begins." Tommy's formal pose lasted only seconds before excitement overtook him again. "Uncle Dan." "Scotty's cat had kittens, and Mr. Martinez says I can have one if Ma and Pa say it's all right." Daniel crouched down to his nephew's level. "Is that so? And what do your Ma and Pa say about that?" Tommy's gaze shifted to his parents, hope written plainly across his features. Frank looked to Jenny with a raised eyebrow, and she sighed in mock resignation. "One kitten," Jenny conceded, "but you'll be responsible for its care, young man." Tommy whooped with joy before catching himself and attempting to look serious again. "I promise I'll take good care of it, Ma." The family dynamic was charming to witness the obvious affection between Jenny and Frank, Daniel's easy rapport with his nephew, the comfortable banter that spoke of deep bonds. Zara felt a pang of something like envy, though she quickly pushed it aside. She had come west to build a new life, not to dwell on what she had lost or never had. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Zara enjoying both the promised pie and the company. More townspeople came and went from the cafe, each introduced to her by Jenny with enthusiastic recommendations of her teaching credentials. By the time the sun began to set, Zara felt she had met half of Bisbee's population and could only hope she would remember even a fraction of the names. Daniel remained longer than Zara expected, nursing his coffee and occasionally joining the conversation but mostly observing. Several times, she glanced up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. As twilight deepened, Frank insisted on escorting Zara back to the teacher's cottage, with Jenny, Daniel, and Tommy joining them for the walk. The evening air was cool after the heat of the day, the sky painted in spectacular hues of orange and pink as the sun sank behind the mountains. "Arizona sunsets are like nothing else," Daniel commented, falling into step beside Zara as they walked. "One thing I never tire of even after 6 years." "It's magnificent," Zara agreed, gazing at the tableau of colors. "In Boston, the buildings often block the horizon." "I'd forgotten what a full sky looks like," Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Takes some getting used to all this open space. Some folks find it overwhelming at first." "And you, did you find it overwhelming?" He considered this, his profile outlined against the sunset. "No," he said finally. "For me, it felt like breathing properly for the first time." There was something in his voice, a quiet intensity that resonated with Zara. She, too, had felt constrained in Boston after her father's death, trapped by societal expectations and dwindling prospects. The vast openness of the territory, despite its dangers and hardships, represented a freedom she had never known. "I think I understand that," she said softly. His gaze met hers, and for a moment something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. Then Tommy bounded back to ask his uncle a question about horses, and the moment dissolved. At the cottage, Jenny handed Zara a small card. "The Ladies' Aid Society meets Thursday afternoons at the church. We'd be delighted to have you join us." "Thank you," Zara said sincerely. "I'll be there." Frank tipped his hat. "Don't be a stranger at the cafe, Miss Fletcher. Teachers need to eat too, and we give a special rate for those educating the next generation." Tommy tugged at Zara's sleeve. "Will we learn about dinosaur bones, Miss Fletcher?" "Billy Thompson says they found some giant bones near Tucson, and I want to know all about them." Zara smiled down at him. "I'm sure we can include natural history in our lessons, Thomas." "You've created a monster now," Jenny laughed, gently pulling her son away. "He'll be full of questions for the next 2 weeks." As the Parkers prepared to leave, Daniel lingered a moment longer. "If you need any help getting your classroom ready, I could spare some time," he offered, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. "The desks might need mending, and that stove looked like it hasn't been lit in months." The offer surprised Zara, but pleasantly so. "That's very kind. I would appreciate the help," he nodded once. "I'll come by Saturday morning if that suits." "Saturday would be perfect," Zara replied, suddenly looking forward to the day with unexpected anticipation. With final goodnights, the group departed, leaving Zara standing in the doorway of her cottage. She watched them walk away, Tommy skipping ahead, Jenny and Frank hand in hand, Daniel's tall figure bringing up the rear. Just before they rounded the bend in the road, Daniel glanced back, raising a hand in farewell. Zara returned the gesture, then stepped inside, closing the door on her first day in Bisbee. The cottage felt small and quiet after the sociability of the afternoon, but not unpleasantly so. She moved about lighting lamps, warming Jenny's stew on the small stove, and preparing for her first night in her new home. As she ate her supper at the little table, Zara reflected on the unexpected turn her journey had taken. Had her wagon wheel not broken, had the storm not driven her to Daniel Lawson's door, she would have arrived in Bisbee as a complete stranger. Instead, she had connections already: Jenny's friendship, Frank's welcome, Tommy's enthusiasm, and whatever this tentative thing was between her and Daniel. Perhaps there was something to be said for broken wagon wheels after all. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as Zara settled into her new life. She met more townspeople, organized her meager belongings in the cottage, and began the daunting task of assessing the schoolroom. As Daniel had predicted, the stove needed a thorough cleaning before it would draw properly, and several desks showed signs of rough treatment during the previous term. Thursday afternoon found her at the Ladies' Aid Society meeting, where she was formally introduced to a dozen women of varying ages, all curious about the new schoolteacher from Boston. Mrs. Greenwood, a formidable widow with steel-gray hair and an intimidating lorgnette, did indeed invite Zara to tea the following afternoon. "We're so pleased to have a lady of refinement teaching our children," Mrs. Greenwood said, examining Zara through her eyepiece. The last teacher, Miss Burke, was competent enough with letters and figures, but sadly lacking in social graces. "Mabel," Jenny interjected, a warning note in her voice. "Miss Burke returned east to care for her ailing mother. She served our community well for 3 years, Mrs. Greenwood sniffed but didn't argue the point. "Nevertheless, we're fortunate to have Miss Fletcher now. Boston has excellent standards for young ladies." The meeting continued with discussions of upcoming socials, charitable efforts for a family whose farm had burned the previous month, and plans for the autumn harvest festival. Zara found herself genuinely enjoying the camaraderie, different as it was from the formal ladies' auxiliaries she had occasionally attended in Boston. Jenny walked with her back to the cottage afterward. "Don't mind Mabel Greenwood too much," she advised. "Her bark is worse than her bite, and she's actually quite generous when it counts. Her late husband was one of the original investors in the Copper Queen mine. She seems formidable," Zara replied diplomatically. "That she is," Jenny agreed with a laugh. "But she'll be your staunchest defender once she decides you're worthy of it." They paused at the path leading to the schoolhouse, Jenny hesitating before speaking again. "Zara, may I call you Zara, of course? I hope you don't mind my asking, but are you truly all right after your ordeal during the storm? It must have been frightening being stranded like that." Zara sensed the question beneath the question. "Your brother was a perfect gentleman," she assured Jenny again. "I was never uncomfortable or afraid." Jenny nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I'm glad to hear it. Dan is. Well, he's had a difficult path. The war changed him, as it did many men. He keeps to himself mostly, so I was surprised when he offered to help with the school repairs." "The war?" Zara inquired carefully, curious about Daniel's past but not wanting to pry inappropriately. "He enlisted at 18, fought for the Union, came back different, quieter," Jenny sighed. "He doesn't speak of it even now, but I know it weighs on him still." Zara thought of the small scar through Daniel's eyebrow, the watchful quality in his eyes, the way he seemed most at ease in the solitude of his cabin. The revelation added another layer to her understanding of the man who had offered shelter during the storm. "I appreciate you telling me," she said to Jenny, "and I'm looking forward to his help with the schoolroom. Several of the desks need repair before classes begin." Jenny smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Yes, well, Dan's always been good with his hands. I'm sure he'll have everything in working order in no time." There was something in her tone that made Zara wonder if Jenny was playing matchmaker. But before she could determine how to respond, they were interrupted by Tommy running up the path, full of excitement about a frog he'd found in the creek. Saturday morning arrived clear and warm, the kind of late summer day that hinted at autumn's approach while still clinging to summer's heat. Zara had been up since dawn, organizing school supplies and making lists of necessary items to order from Tucson. She had just put a pot of coffee on to boil when a knock sounded at the schoolhouse door. Daniel stood on the steps, hat in hand, a wooden toolbox at his feet. He was freshly shaven, his hair still damp at the temples, and he wore a clean blue shirt that brought out the color of his eyes. The sight of him caused a flutter in Zara's chest that she firmly attributed to surprise at his punctuality. "Good morning," she greeted him, suddenly aware of her own appearance, hair hastily pinned up, a simple calico dress covered by an old apron she'd found in the schoolhouse cupboard. "You're right on time." "Morning," he replied, picking up his toolbox. "Thought we should get an early start. There's a lot to do if the state of things when I last saw this place is any indication." Zara stepped aside to let him enter. "Coffee's almost ready." "I'm afraid I don't have much to offer in the way of breakfast, but Jenny sent over some biscuits yesterday." Daniel moved past her into the schoolroom, his gaze taking in the rows of desks, the blackboard on the far wall, the small stove in the corner. "Place hasn't changed much since I was a boy," he commented. "You attended school here?" Zara asked, surprised. "For a few years after we moved to the territory." He set down his toolbox, running a hand along one of the desktops, finger tracing an initial carved into the wood. "Old Mr. Callahan was the teacher then. Had a wooden leg from the Mexican War and a temper to match, rapped knuckles for the slightest infraction." Zara winced. "I prefer more enlightened disciplinary methods." Daniel glanced up at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I figured as much." "You don't strike me as the knuckle-rapping type." "I believe children learn better through encouragement than fear," Zara said, moving to the stove to check on the coffee. "Tommy will appreciate that philosophy," Daniel replied, opening his toolbox. "Now, which desks need the most attention?" They worked steadily through the morning, Daniel repairing wobbly desk legs and loose floorboards while Zara cleaned windows and organized bookshelves. The work was companionable, with conversation flowing easily between them about the school, the town, the books Zara planned to use in her teaching. Daniel proved to be surprisingly well-read for a rancher, discussing literature with knowledge that spoke of a solid education. "My mother was determined her children would be educated, frontier or not," he explained when Zara commented on his familiarity with Dickens. "She taught us herself before schools were established out here and made sure we always had books, even when other luxuries were scarce." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Zara said, genuinely impressed. "She was," Daniel replied, a shadow crossing his features. "She passed 5 years ago." "Influenza?" "I'm sorry," Zara said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of loss. "My mother died when I was 14. It's a difficult thing, losing a parent." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Your father raised you after that?" "Yes." "He was a professor at Harvard Classics and Literature. Our home was always filled with books and scholarly debates." Zara smiled at the memory. "He wasn't very practical about everyday matters, but he ensured I received an education equal to any man's." "And now you're passing that gift on to others," Daniel observed, his voice warm with approval. The morning stretched into afternoon as they continued working. Daniel fixed the balky stove, cleaned the chimney, and repaired the sagging porch steps, while Zara prepared the classroom for her future students. They broke for a simple lunch of cold biscuits and preserves, sitting on the porch steps in the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree. "The desks are in better shape than I expected," Daniel said, accepting the cup of water Zara offered. "Should last another year at least." "Thanks to your repairs," Zara replied. "I'm truly grateful for your help. I wouldn't have known where to begin with some of those problems." Daniel shrugged off her thanks. "Glad to be useful. Besides, it's in my best interest to make sure Tommy has a functional classroom." Zara smiled at the mention of his nephew. He's a bright boy. I can already tell he'll be one of my most enthusiastic students. He's curious about everything, Daniel agreed, pride evident in his voice. Gets that from Jenny. She was always asking questions that drove our parents to distraction. And you, Zara asked, were you the quiet one or another source of parental distraction? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I had my moments of mischief. Got into plenty of scrapes as a boy, though I learned to be more careful after getting on the wrong side of Mr. Callahan's ruler once too often. The conversation drifted to childhood memories, Daniel's early years in Missouri before his family moved west, Zara's sheltered upbringing in Boston. Despite the vast differences in their backgrounds, they discovered surprising commonalities: a love of reading, a fondness for autumn, a shared dislike of pretension. Boston society can be exhaustingly concerned with appearances, Zara confessed. After my father died and our financial situation became precarious, I found many former friends suddenly too busy to receive visits. Daniel's expression darkened. People can be cruel when fortunes change. Not everyone, Zara amended, thinking of the few loyal friends who had stood by her. But enough to make leaving easier than it might have been. Daniel studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. Their loss is Bisbee's gain, he said finally. The simple statement, delivered without artifice, warmed Zara more than elaborate compliments from Boston suitors ever had. She found herself blushing slightly, turning her attention to brushing crumbs from her apron to hide her reaction. They returned to work after lunch, the afternoon passing quickly as they completed the remaining tasks. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the schoolhouse had been transformed, floors swept and mopped, desks repaired and arranged in neat rows, windows gleaming, stove cleaned and tested. Zara stood in the center of the room, turning in a slow circle to admire their accomplishments. I can hardly believe this is the same place. It's perfect. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a slight smile. You'll be a good teacher, he said. I can tell. How? Zara asked, curious about his assessment. The care you took arranging everything, the books you chose to display prominently, the way you talked about what you hope to accomplish here. He shrugged. Some people teach because it's a job, others teach because they can't imagine doing anything else. You strike me as the second kind. Zara was touched by his perception. My father always said education was the greatest gift one person could give another. I hope to honor that belief. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the schoolroom bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. I should be going, Daniel said finally, reaching for his hat. Got chores waiting at home. Of course, Zara replied, suddenly reluctant to see the day end. Thank you again for all your help. I couldn't have done this alone. Daniel gathered his tools, packing them methodically into the wooden box. At the door, he paused, turning back to Zara with an expression she couldn't quite read. There's a social at the church next Saturday evening, he said, the words coming a bit more rapidly than his usual measured pace. A welcome for you, actually. Jenny mentioned it. Yes, Mrs. Greenwood told me about it yesterday, Zara confirmed, wondering where this was leading. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, an uncharacteristic display of uncertainty from a man who typically moved with such confidence. I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you to the social. The request was formal, almost stiff, but the look in his eyes was anything but. Zara felt a rush of pleasure at the invitation, followed immediately by caution. She had come to Bisbee to establish herself as the schoolteacher, respectable, independent, focused on her duties. Arriving at her welcome social on the arm of a man she'd known less than a week might create impressions she wasn't sure she wanted to encourage, and yet. I would like that, she heard herself say, the words bypassing her careful considerations entirely. Daniel's expression brightened, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. Good, that's good. I'll come by around 6 if that suits. 6 would be perfect, Zara confirmed, a smile spreading across her face to match his own. He nodded once, settled his hat on his head, and departed with a final glance that lingered just long enough to send a pleasant warmth coursing through Zara's veins. She watched from the doorway as he walked down the path, toolbox in hand, his stride long and easy. Only when he had disappeared around the bend in the road did she allow herself to acknowledge the fluttering anticipation in her chest. It was just a social, she reminded herself. A community gathering to welcome the new schoolteacher. The fact that Daniel Lawson would be accompanying her was simply neighborly. Even as she formed the thought, Zara knew it wasn't entirely true. There had been moments throughout the day, a shared glance that lasted a beat too long, the brush of hands as they worked side by side, conversations that flowed with unexpected ease that suggested something more than neighborly interest on both sides. The realization was both thrilling and unsettling. Zara had not come to Bisbee looking for romance. After the disappointments in Boston, where two promising courtships had ended when her father's death revealed their financial straits, she had determined to focus on her career, to build a life that depended on no one but herself. Yet here she was, barely a week in her new home, looking forward to a social event not because it would help establish her place in the community, but because Daniel Lawson would be at her side. The week leading up to the social passed in a blur of activity. Zara continued preparing for the school term, attended tea with Mrs. Greenwood, successfully complimenting her china as Jenny had advised, and gradually became more familiar with Bisbee and its inhabitants. Jenny invited her to Sunday dinner, where she enjoyed a delicious meal and the lively company of the Parker family, including Daniel, who seemed more relaxed in his sister's home than Zara had yet seen him. By Saturday evening, Zara was both excited and nervous about the social. She had spent more time than she cared to admit selecting her attire, finally settling on her best dress, a deep blue silk with modest lace trim that she had packed for special occasions. It was perhaps a bit formal for a frontier gathering, but she wanted to make a good impression on the community that had entrusted their children's education to her care. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Zara took a deep breath, checked her appearance one final time in the small mirror, and went to answer it. Daniel stood on her porch, hat in hand, dressed in what were clearly his best clothes, a dark suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved close enough that only the faintest shadow remained along his jaw. The overall effect was striking, transforming the rugged rancher into a gentleman who wouldn't have looked out of place in a Boston drawing room. For a moment they simply regarded each other, mutual appreciation evident in their expressions. "You look beautiful," Daniel said finally, the simple statement carrying more weight than florid compliments. "Thank you," Zara replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." He offered his arm with an old-fashioned formality that charmed her. "Shall we?" The church social hall was decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers, tables arranged around a cleared space for dancing. A small group of musicians, a fiddler, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica were setting up in one corner. Nearly every resident of Bisbee seemed to be in attendance, the room humming with conversation and laughter. Their entrance together caused a brief lull in the nearest conversations, followed by renewed chatter that Zara suspected might have something to do with her escort. Daniel seemed unbothered by the attention, guiding her through the crowd with quiet confidence, introducing her to those she hadn't yet met and ensuring she had refreshments. Mayor Wilson made a brief speech welcoming Zara to Bisbee, expressing the town's delight in securing such a qualified teacher for their children. Zara responded with a few words of thanks, genuinely touched by the community's warm reception. The formal portion of the evening concluded, the musicians struck up a lively tune and couples began to take to the dance floor. "Would you care to dance?" Daniel asked, extending his hand. Zara hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm only familiar with formal Boston dances. These frontier reels may be beyond my abilities." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'll teach you. It's not so different, just a bit more energetic." The dance proved to be exactly that, a spirited affair that left Zara breathless and laughing as Daniel guided her through the steps. He was a surprisingly good dancer, moving with the same natural grace he showed on horseback. His hand at her waist was steady, his lead confident without being domineering. As the evening progressed, Zara danced with several other men: Frank Parker, Mayor Wilson, and the young doctor who had recently established a practice in Bisbee but found herself most comfortable with Daniel. There was something about his presence that put her at ease, a sense of security in his quiet strength. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for some air. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky in a dazzling display impossible to see in Boston's lamp-lit streets. "It's breathtaking," Zara murmured, gazing upward. "One of the best things about living out here," Daniel agreed, following her gaze. "No matter how difficult the day, the stars remind you that your troubles are pretty small in the grand scheme of things." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the music and laughter from inside creating a pleasant backdrop to the night's tranquility. "Are you happy here?" Daniel asked suddenly. "In Bisbee, I mean. Is it what you hoped for when you left Boston?" Zara considered the question seriously. "It's early days yet, but yes, I think I am. Everyone has been so welcoming, especially your family. The school is a challenge I look forward to, and—" She hesitated, then continued more softly, "and I've already made connections I value." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the growing bond neither had anticipated when her wagon wheel broke during the storm. Daniel took a step closer, his voice low. "Zara, there you are." Jenny's voice interrupted whatever he had been about to say. She appeared in the doorway, Tommy at her side. "They're about to serve the desserts, and Tommy is determined Miss Fletcher should try his contribution." "I made apple dumplings," Tommy announced proudly. "Well, Ma helped, but I did most of it myself." The moment broken, Zara smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. "I wouldn't miss them for the world, Thomas." As they returned inside, Daniel's hand came to rest briefly at the small of Zara's back, a fleeting touch, but one that sent warmth spreading through her nonetheless. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with Zara duly admiring Tommy's apple dumplings, which were indeed delicious, dancing several more times with Daniel, and continuing to get acquainted with her new neighbors. By the time the musicians played their final song, she felt more integrated into the community than she had dared hope after only a week in Bisbee. Daniel walked her home beneath a canopy of stars, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed the evening's events. At her door, they paused, both suddenly aware of the moment's significance. "Thank you for escorting me," Zara said, looking up at him in the soft light spilling from her cottage window. "I had a wonderful time." "As did I," Daniel replied, his voice lower than usual. He seemed to be debating something internally, his eyes searching her face. "Zara, I know you've only been in Bisbee a short while, and I don't want to presume, but I've enjoyed your company these past days, very much." Zara's heart quickened at the earnestness in his expression. "I've enjoyed yours as well, Dan. Would it be forward of me to ask if I might call on you properly? Sunday afternoons, perhaps, or whenever would be convenient with your schedule." The formal request, so reminiscent of Boston courtship rituals yet delivered with Daniel's straightforward sincerity, touched Zara deeply. "That would be lovely," she replied honestly. "I would like that very much." Relief and pleasure crossed his features. For a moment he seemed about to say more, but instead he took her hand gently in his, raising it to his lips in a gesture that belonged more to drawing rooms than frontier porches. "Good night, Zara," he said softly, releasing her hand. "Good night, Dan," she replied, her skin still tingling from the brief contact. He waited until she was safely inside before departing, his footsteps fading into the quiet night. Zara leaned against the closed door, a smile playing at her lips as she replayed the evening in her mind. Boston seemed very far away indeed. The following weeks established a rhythm to Zara's new life in Bisbee. School began with 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, each presenting unique challenges and rewards. Tommy Parker proved to be as bright and curious as predicted, though his enthusiasm occasionally needed channeling into more structured learning. The oldest girl, 14-year-old Maria Sanchez, became Zara's unofficial assistant, helping younger children with their letters while advancing her own studies in literature and mathematics. True to his word, Daniel began calling on Zara regularly, usually on Sunday afternoons after church services. These visits quickly became the highlight of Zara's week. Sometimes they would simply sit on her porch, talking as the afternoon sun dipped toward the western mountains. Other times, they would take walks along Miller Creek or ride into the surrounding hills, Daniel pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. Through these conversations, Zara gradually learned more about the man who had offered shelter during the storm. Daniel had enlisted in the Union Army at 18, serving under General Sherman during the March to the Sea. He spoke little of the fighting itself, but Zara gathered that the experience had marked him deeply. After the war, he had drifted west, working as a scout, a ranch hand, and occasionally a lawman before settling in the Arizona Territory to establish his small ranch. The openness of it appealed to me, he explained as they sat beneath a cottonwood tree one Sunday in early October. After the war, being crowded in cities made me uneasy. Out here, a man can breathe. Zara understood the sentiment better now that she had experienced the vast expanses of the territory herself. There's a freedom here that Boston lacks, she agreed. Though I do occasionally miss certain conveniences, reliable plumbing, for instance, or bookshops on every corner. Daniel smiled at that. I can't help with the plumbing, but I might have a solution for the books. The following Sunday, he arrived with a wooden crate filled with volumes from his own collection: novels, poetry, histories, and scientific texts that reflected a mind far more curious and educated than his frontier persona might suggest. I thought you might like to borrow some, he said almost shyly as Zara examined the unexpected treasure. They were my mother's mostly. She'd be pleased to know they're being appreciated. This is wonderful, Zara breathed, carefully handling a leather-bound copy of Emerson's essays. But are you sure you want to part with them, even temporarily? They must be precious to you. Books are meant to be read, Daniel replied simply. They've been sitting on my shelves too long. This generosity was typical of the man. Zara was coming to know quiet, thoughtful gestures that revealed his character more clearly than grand pronouncements ever could. He repaired her porch steps without being asked, brought fresh vegetables from his garden when in season, and always listened attentively when she spoke of her teaching challenges or her past in Boston. As autumn deepened, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light to the landscape, Zara found herself increasingly drawn to Daniel Lawson. Their courtship, for that was what it had become, though neither had explicitly named it, progressed with a measured pace that suited them both. There were no dramatic declarations or impulsive actions, just a steady deepening of mutual respect and affection. The change in their relationship did not go unnoticed in Bisbee. Jenny's knowing smiles when she observed them together spoke volumes, while Mrs. Greenwood made pointed comments about the propriety of excessive attention from unmarried gentlemen to our schoolmistress. Mayor Wilson, however, seemed pleased by the development, telling Zara that Lawson's a good man, steady as they come. Town's been hoping he'd settle down properly one of these days. Zara took these comments in stride, neither encouraging gossip nor denying her growing feelings for Daniel. She had come to Bisbee seeking independence, yes, but not isolation. The connection she was forming with Daniel enhanced rather than diminished her sense of self-sufficiency. One crisp November afternoon, they rode out to a mesa overlooking the valley where Bisbee nestled among the hills. The view was spectacular, the town laid out below like a miniature model, surrounded by copper-colored rock formations and the distant purple shadows of mountains. They dismounted, letting their horses graze while they sat on a sun-warmed boulder. I used to come up here when I first moved to the area, Daniel said, gazing out over the landscape. Help me get my bearings, seeing everything from this perspective. It's beautiful, Zara replied, drawing her shawl more closely around her shoulders against the autumn breeze. I can see why you chose to settle here. Daniel nodded, then turned to face her more directly. Zara, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. There was a seriousness in his tone that caused Zara's heart to quicken. Yes. We've been keeping company for nearly 2 months now, he began, his usually steady voice betraying a hint of nervousness. In that time I've come to, that is, my feelings for you have. He paused, seeming frustrated with his own hesitancy, then started again more directly. I care for you deeply, Zara. More than I expected was possible when you first appeared at my door during that storm. Zara felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. I care for you too, Dan, she said softly. His expression brightened at her words, though he maintained his earnest demeanor. I'm not a man who speaks easily of such things, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I hope in time you might consider a more permanent arrangement between us. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. This belonged to my mother. I'd be honored if you would accept it as a token of my regard. Unwrapping the handkerchief, he revealed a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with a subtle floral pattern etched into the surface. Zara's breath caught. Dan, it's beautiful. It's not a formal proposal, he hastened to clarify, his eyes searching hers. I know it's too soon for that. But I wanted you to have some assurance of my feelings and intentions. The gesture moved Zara deeply. In Boston, courtship followed rigid protocols, with formal calls and chaperoned outings leading eventually to an engagement approved by parents and social circles. Here in the territory, conventions were more flexible, but Daniel had chosen a path that honored both her Eastern sensibilities and Western realities. I would be honored to accept it, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Daniel's relief was palpable. He carefully placed the locket around her neck, his fingers briefly brushing her skin as he secured the clasp. The touch sent a pleasant shiver down Zara's spine. It suits you, he said, his voice low as he drew back to admire the effect. Zara touched the locket where it rested against her collarbone, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. Thank you, Dan, not just for the locket, but for everything, for taking me in during the storm, for helping me settle in Bisbee, for your friendship, and now, this. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the distance between them seemed both vast and infinitesimal. Daniel's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, and Zara felt herself leaning forward slightly in unconscious invitation. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a tentative exploration rather than a passionate claim. Daniel's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch as light as if he were handling something infinitely precious. Zara's eyes fluttered closed as she returned the kiss, her heart racing with a combination of nervousness and exhilaration. When they parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers for a moment, his breath warm against her skin. I've been wanting to do that since the church social, he admitted quietly. Zara smiled, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. I believe I've been hoping you would. The ride back to town was filled with a new awareness between them, a sense of possibility stretching out like the landscape around them. Daniel left her at her cottage door with another brief kiss and a promise to see her at Sunday services the following day. That night, as Zara prepared for bed, she found herself repeatedly touching the locket at her throat, a tangible reminder of the connection forming between herself and a man she hadn't even known 3 months earlier. Had someone told her in Boston that she would find herself in the Arizona territory, teaching frontier children and falling in love with a rancher, she would have dismissed the notion as romantic nonsense. Yet here she was, and for the first time since her father's death, the future seemed full of promise rather than uncertainty. Winter arrived in Bisbee with crisp mornings, occasional dustings of snow on the highest peaks, and preparations for Christmas. The school term continued successfully, with Zara's students showing steady progress in their studies. Her relationship with Daniel deepened, their Sunday afternoons together now including dinner with the Parkers or quiet evenings by her fireplace, reading aloud to each other from favorite books. The locket he had given her rarely left her throat, becoming as much a part of her daily attire as her watch or cameo brooch. When curious students asked about it, she simply said it was a gift from a friend, though the older girls exchanged knowing glances at her response. As Christmas approached, the town bustled with activity. The Ladies' Aid Society organized a pageant featuring the schoolchildren, with Zara directing rehearsals after regular lessons. Daniel helped construct the simple sets, displaying unexpected artistic talent in painting backdrops of Bethlehem beneath a star-filled sky. "You continue to surprise me, Mr. Lawson," Zara teased as she watched him adding detail to a painted palm tree. "Is there anything you can't do?" "Plenty," he replied with a self-deprecating smile. "But I've always enjoyed drawing. Used to sketch landscapes during quiet moments in the war, helped pass the time, keep the mind occupied with something besides." He trailed off, his expression momentarily distant before he shook away whatever memories had surfaced. Anyway, Tommy's excited about his role as a wise man. Zara allowed the subject change, having learned that Daniel would speak of his war experiences in his own time, if at all. "He's taking it very seriously. Yesterday he asked if he could bring one of your mother's brass candlesticks as his gift of gold." Daniel chuckled. "Jenny mentioned that. I told her it was fine by me, as long as he doesn't drop it on anyone's foot during the performance." The pageant, held the Sunday before Christmas, was a resounding success despite the usual mishaps of children's productions: forgotten lines, toppled scenery, and one shepherd's sheep. Actually, the butcher's dog with a white sheet draped over it escaping into the audience to general hilarity. Afterward, the community gathered in the church social hall for refreshments and caroling. Daniel found Zara as she was helping serve cider to the children, touching her elbow lightly to gain her attention. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" he asked, an unfamiliar tension in his voice. "Of course," Zara replied, puzzled by his demeanor. She handed the ladle to Jenny, who gave her a curious look but asked no questions. Daniel led her outside, where the night air was cold and clear, their breath forming small clouds in the stillness. The church windows glowed with warm light, and distant voices raised in silent night provided a gentle soundtrack to the moment. "Is everything all right?" Zara asked, concerned by his seriousness. "Yes," Daniel assured her quickly. "More than all right, I just—" He took a deep breath, seeming to steel himself. "I had planned to wait until Christmas Day, but seeing you tonight with the children, how happy you looked, I couldn't wait any longer." Zara's pulse quickened as Daniel reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that looked incongruous in his calloused hand. He opened it to reveal a ring, a simple but elegant design with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. "Zara Fletcher," he said, his voice steady now, eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "These past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and purpose back into my world in ways I never expected. I know it hasn't been long, but I'm certain of my feelings and, I hope, of yours. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had sensed their relationship moving in this direction, the actual moment still caught Zara unprepared. Emotion welled up, making speech momentarily impossible. She stared at the ring, then at Daniel's face, earnest, hopeful, and more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Yes," she managed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Dan, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his features was answer enough to any lingering doubts she might have harbored. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then drew her into an embrace that was both tender and fiercely protective. "I love you, Zara," he murmured against her hair. "Have since that first morning, seeing you in my borrowed clothes, looking like you belonged in my home." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling natural and right as they left her lips. "Though I think it took me until the church social to admit it to myself." Their kiss was deeper than previous ones, a seal on promises made and a hint of possibilities to come. When they finally parted, both a bit breathless, the caroling from inside had given way to more lively tunes and the sounds of dancing. "Should we go back inside?" Zara asked, though she was reluctant to rejoin the crowd just yet. Daniel smiled down at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "In a moment. I'm enjoying having you to myself." They stood together in the cold December night, her head resting against his shoulder, his arm secure around her waist, both contemplating the future that now stretched before them, shared and infinitely brighter for being so. The news of their engagement spread through Bisbee with the speed only a small town can achieve. By noon the following day, Zara had received congratulations from nearly every parent of her students, a somewhat begrudging blessing from Mrs. Greenwood, and an exuberant embrace from Jenny, who declared she had known from the start that Zara would be her sister. The school term ended for the Christmas holiday, giving Zara time to consider the practical implications of her engagement. As a married woman, she would not be permitted to continue teaching, a fact that gave her pause, despite her happiness in her relationship with Daniel. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as they sat before the fire in her cottage on Christmas Eve, "about after we're married." Zara looked up from the book she had been reading aloud, marking their place with her finger. "Oh, my place is too small for us, especially if we have a family someday." A faint flush colored his cheeks at the reference to children. "I've had my eye on the old Thompson property, about halfway between my ranch and town. It's good land, has a decent house that needs some work but has the bones of something fine. We could make it ours, together." The thoughtfulness of the proposal touched Zara deeply. The Thompson property would place them close enough to Bisbee for easy visits with Jenny's family while still providing the privacy Daniel valued. "That sounds perfect," she said sincerely. "Though I admit, I've been wondering about my teaching position." "I know married women aren't typically allowed to continue." Daniel nodded, having clearly anticipated this concern. "I spoke with Mayor Wilson about that. He said given the difficulty of finding qualified teachers willing to come to the territory, they might make an exception in your case, at least until circumstances change." Again, that hint of color in his cheeks. "If that's what you want, of course." The offer stunned Zara. In Boston, such an arrangement would have been unthinkable. That Daniel had taken the initiative to speak with the mayor to help preserve this part of her identity that had become so important spoke volumes about his respect for her as more than just a future wife. "You would support that?" she asked, wanting to be certain of his feelings. "Zara," he said seriously, taking her hand in his, "I fell in love with you as you are dedicated to your students, passionate about education, independent in spirit. I wouldn't ask you to change that, not if continuing to teach makes you happy." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at his understanding. "It does make me happy," she admitted, "though not as happy as the thought of building a life with you." Daniel raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then it's settled. You'll continue teaching, at least for now, and we'll make our home at the Thompson place. We can start renovations after the wedding." They had set the date for early March, when winter's grip would be loosening and before the spring term of school became too demanding. It would be a small ceremony at the church, followed by a celebration at Frank's Cafe, which Jenny insisted on organizing despite Zara's protests that she didn't want to impose. Christmas Day brought more joy as they exchanged simple gifts: a knitted scarf from Zara for Daniel, and from him to her, a set of illustrated botanical guides he had ordered from Tucson, knowing her interest in the desert flora. They spent the day with the Parkers, enjoying a festive meal and Tommy's excitement over his new pocketknife from his uncle. As winter progressed, plans for their future took shape. Daniel purchased the Thompson property and began repairs on the house, often working long hours after tending to his own ranch. Zara resumed teaching after the holiday break, her students full of questions about her engagement and future plans. "Will you live in a big house like in the storybooks?" asked 6-year-old Sarah Wilson, the mayor's youngest daughter. "Not quite so grand," Zara replied with a smile, "but it will be a lovely home with plenty of room for a garden." "Will you have babies?" Tommy Parker inquired bluntly, causing the older girls to giggle and Zara to blush furiously. "Tommy," Maria Sanchez scolded, "that's not a proper question." "Why not?" Tommy demanded. "Ma says it's natural to have babies when you're married. Uncle Dan would make a good pa, I think." Zara managed to redirect the conversation back to arithmetic, but Tommy's innocent observation lingered in her mind. She had always assumed she would have children someday, though her decision to pursue teaching had pushed those thoughts to some distant future. Now, with marriage only weeks away, the possibility seemed both more immediate and more desirable than she had anticipated. February brought unusually warm weather, allowing work on the Thompson house to progress faster than expected. Zara rode out with Daniel one Saturday afternoon to see the renovations, marveling at the transformation already taking place. The house was larger than she had imagined, 2 stories, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and one side. Inside, the rooms were spacious and filled with light from tall windows. Daniel had replaced the flooring throughout the main level and was working on building new cabinets for the kitchen. "What do you think?" he asked, watching her face as she explored what would soon be their home. "It's wonderful," Zara replied honestly. "Far more than I expected. How did you manage all this while still running your ranch?" "Had some help," Daniel admitted. "Frank's been coming out when the cafe's not busy, and some of the miners lend a hand on their days off. Word got around that I was fixing up a place for the schoolteacher, and folks were eager to contribute. They think highly of you, Zara." The knowledge that the community had rallied to help create their home touched Zara deeply. "I'll have to find a way to thank everyone." "Already taken care of," Daniel assured her. "Jenny's planning a housewarming after we're settled. Apparently it will involve an alarming amount of food and possibly dancing on the new porch." He grinned, the expression lightening his features in a way that still made Zara's heart skip. "Now come see upstairs. I think you'll like the room I've set aside for your books." As they climbed the stairs hand in hand, Zara found herself imagining their future life in this house: quiet evenings reading by the fire, mornings sharing coffee on the porch, perhaps someday the patter of small feet on the wooden floors. The vision filled her with a contentment she hadn't known was possible. March arrived with the promise of spring wildflowers beginning to dot the hillsides, trees budding, and a general sense of renewal in the air. The wedding was set for the 2nd Saturday of the month, with Reverend Taylor officiating at the church where they had first danced together at the welcome social. The night before the ceremony, Jenny hosted a small dinner for family at her home. Tommy, excited about his role as ring-bearer, practiced walking solemnly down an imaginary aisle until his father gently suggested he might want to save some of that solemnity for the actual wedding. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel walked Zara back to her cottage for the last time. Tomorrow she would move her belongings to their new home, leaving behind the simple teacher's residence that had served as her first independent dwelling. "Nervous?" Daniel asked as they paused at her door. "A little," Zara admitted, "but not about marrying you." She smiled up at him, still occasionally struck by the unexpected turn her life had taken. "Just the normal anticipation, I think, and perhaps a touch of nostalgia for this place. It was my first real home of my own." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's where I first saw you in the morning light," he recalled. "Standing by the stove in my borrowed clothes, looking both out of place and perfectly at home at the same time. I was terrified," Zara confessed with a soft laugh. "A stranger's cabin, my future uncertain, and there you were, making coffee as if finding a bedraggled schoolteacher on your doorstep was an everyday occurrence." "Best storm that ever hit the territory as far as I'm concerned," Daniel said, his voice low as he drew her closer. "Brought me the greatest gift I never knew to ask for." Their kiss was tender, a gentle affirmation of promises soon to be formalized. When they parted, Daniel touched her cheek lightly, his expression serious. "Tomorrow, when you say those words to have and to hold, from this day forward know that I mean every syllable of my vow to you. You won't ever have cause to doubt that." Zara covered his hand with her own, deeply moved by the quiet intensity of his pledge. Nor will you, Dan, that I promise. One final kiss, and then he was gone, striding down the path toward town where he would spend his last night as a bachelor at his sister's house, as tradition dictated. Zara entered her cottage, the small space already feeling like a memory rather than a home. Tomorrow would bring change, a new name, a new dwelling, a new chapter in the unexpected story that had begun with a broken wagon wheel and a lightning storm. She touched the locket at her throat, then glanced down at the engagement ring on her finger, symbols of the journey that had brought her to this moment. Across the distance, somewhere in town, was the man who had offered shelter when she needed it most, saying simply, "Stay until it's safe." Little had either of them known then that safe would come to mean something far more profound than shelter from a storm, that they would find in each other the safety of belonging, of being truly known and accepted, of love that had grown quietly but with unshakable strength in the Arizona soil. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, as if the territory itself approved of the union about to take place. Zara woke early, a flutter of excitement in her stomach as she realized the significance of the day. Jenny arrived shortly after breakfast, arms laden with her own wedding dress, which she had altered to fit Zara. "Something borrowed," she explained with a smile, helping Zara into the ivory gown with its delicate lace overlay. "Though we've added some new ribbons, so that counts as something new as well." The dress fit perfectly, the alterations enhancing Zara's slender figure while maintaining the modest elegance of the original design. Jenny arranged Zara's copper hair in a simple updo, adorned with small white flowers gathered from the hillside that morning. "You look beautiful," Jenny said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "My brother won't know what hit him." The church was filled with nearly every resident of Bisbee by the time Zara arrived. Mayor Wilson, who had offered to escort her in her father's absence, waited with dignified patience as she took a moment to compose herself before entering. "Ready, Miss Fletcher?" he asked kindly. "Or I should say almost Mrs. Lawson." Zara took a deep breath, then nodded. "Ready." The simple notes of a piano replaced the elaborate organ music of Boston weddings, but to Zara, the melody was perfect as she walked down the aisle on Mayor Wilson's arm. The faces of her students, her neighbors, her new friends all turned to watch her progress. But Zara had eyes only for the tall figure waiting at the altar. Daniel stood straight and solemn in his best suit, freshly trimmed hair gleaming in the light filtering through the church's stained glass windows. As she approached, his expression transformed, the serious set of his mouth softening, his eyes warming with an emotion so profound, it nearly took Zara's breath away. Mayor Wilson placed her hand in Daniel's with a formal nod before taking his seat. Daniel's fingers closed gently around hers, warm and steady, grounding her in the moment. "You're beautiful," he whispered, too low for anyone but her to hear. Reverend Taylor began the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly through the church as he spoke of the sacred bonds of matrimony, the duties of husband and wife, the foundation they would build together. When the time came for vows, Daniel's voice was unwavering, his promises delivered with the same straightforward sincerity that had characterized their entire relationship. Zara's own vows came from the heart, her voice clear despite the emotion tightening her throat. Tommy performed his duty as ring-bearer with solemn importance, carefully offering the simple gold bands they had chosen together. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Taylor concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Lawson, you may kiss your bride." Daniel's kiss was gentle, but possessed a new certainty, the seal on a covenant made before God and their community. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Lawson, the church erupted in applause and cheers, none louder than Tommy's enthusiastic whoop. The celebration at Frank's Cafe afterward was joyous and relaxed, with abundant food, music, and dancing. Zara found herself passed from partner to partner as townsmen claimed the traditional dance with the bride, but she always returned to Daniel, drawn to his side like a compass finding north. As the afternoon light began to fade, they said their goodbyes. accepting final congratulations and well wishes before departing for their new home. Daniel had arranged for Zara's remaining belongings to be moved from the teacher's cottage that morning, so everything awaited them at the Thompson house, now the Lawson house. She corrected herself mentally. They rode in Daniel's wagon, her hand tucked securely in his as they left town behind. The road to their property was lined with early spring wildflowers, the landscape painted in soft golds and greens as the setting sun cast long shadows across the terrain. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson?" Daniel asked, glancing down at her with a smile that still made her heart flutter after all these months. "Completely, Mr. Lawson," she replied, leaning against his shoulder as the horses carried them home. Their house came into view as they crested a small rise, the freshly painted exterior gleaming in the evening light, smoke rising gently from the chimney where someone, Frank, most likely, had laid a fire in anticipation of their arrival. It was a scene from a dream Zara hadn't known she harbored until it materialized before her. Daniel helped her down from the wagon, but instead of leading her toward the house, he surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Dan," she exclaimed, laughing as he carried her up the porch steps. "What are you doing, carrying my wife across the threshold?" he replied matter-of-factly, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. "It's tradition." He managed the door with minimal awkwardness, stepping into the front hall before setting her gently on her feet. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, with simple but comfortable furnishings that combined Daniel's existing pieces with new items they had selected together. A bottle of wine and 2 glasses waited on the table, alongside a basket covered with a checkered cloth. A note in Jenny's handwriting wished them happiness in their new home and explained that she had prepared a cold supper for them, not wanting to intrude on their first evening as husband and wife. "Your sister thinks of everything," Zara said, touched by the thoughtfulness. "She's had plenty of practice looking after me," Daniel replied, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Though I think she's relieved to pass that duty on to you now." "A duty I accept gladly," Zara said, moving into his embrace. Daniel's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "You know, when you showed up at my cabin during that storm, soaked to the skin and worried about your horses, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Didn't imagine then that you'd one day be my wife. And I never imagined the cowboy who offered shelter would become the center of my world," Zara replied softly. "Life has a way of surprising us, it seems." "The best kind of surprise," Daniel murmured before lowering his lips to hers. The kiss deepened, no longer constrained by the propriety that had governed their courtship. Here, in the privacy of their home, they were free to express the full measure of their feelings, and Zara found herself responding with a passion that both surprised and delighted her. When they finally parted, both a bit breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Zara Lawson." The name, her new name, sent a thrill of happiness through her. "And I love you, Daniel Lawson, now and always." Outside, the last light of day gave way to the soft darkness of an Arizona night, stars appearing one by one in the vast sky above their home. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light across the room where 2 lives, brought together by chance and choice, by storm and shelter, began their journey as one. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of childish laughter echoed across the yard as Zara Lawson stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. Her 3-year-old son, William, was attempting to help his father repair the garden fence, his small hands clutching a wooden mallet with determined concentration. "Careful there, Will," Daniel cautioned, steadying the boy's aim. "That's it, nice and easy." The scene brought a smile to Zara's lips. Daniel had proven to be a natural father, patient, loving, and endlessly willing to involve their son in his daily activities, no matter how much longer each task took as a result. "Mama," Will called, spotting her on the porch. "I'm helping Papa fix the fence." "I can see that," Zara replied, descending the steps carefully, one hand resting on her swollen abdomen. At 7 months along with their second child, her movements had slowed considerably in recent weeks. "You're doing an excellent job." Daniel rose to greet her, concern flitting across his features. "Everything all right, you should be resting." "I'm fine," Zara assured him, "just wanted some fresh air, and to tell you that Jenny and Tommy have arrived." As if on cue, the sound of a wagon approaching drew their attention to the road. Tommy, now 13 and nearly as tall as his mother, handled the reins with the confidence of long practice. Jenny sat beside him, waving as they neared the house. "Uncle Dan, Aunt Zara." Tommy called, bringing the wagon to a neat stop beside the barn. "Ma made apple pie, did she now?" Daniel replied, lifting Will onto his shoulders where the boy perched happily. "That's fortunate, as your aunt has been craving something sweet all day." Zara swatted his arm playfully. "Don't exaggerate, it was only since lunchtime." The past 5 years had brought changes both expected and surprising to their lives. Zara had continued teaching for the first 2 years of their marriage, until Will's imminent arrival necessitated her retirement from the schoolroom. To her surprise, she had found contentment in focusing on their home and family, discovering that the skills that made her an effective teacher translated well to motherhood. Daniel's ranch had prospered under his careful management, expanding to include not only cattle, but also a small apple orchard and a vegetable garden that supplied much of their own needs with enough left over to sell in town. The house had evolved as well, with additional rooms built as their family grew, a larger kitchen where Zara discovered an unexpected talent for baking, and bookshelves that now lined an entire wall of what they called the library. Tommy bounded from the wagon, immediately engaging his cousin in conversation about a new foal born at their homestead. Jenny followed more sedately, the promised pie carefully balanced in her hands. "How are you feeling?" she asked Zara, her gaze assessing with sisterly concern. "Well enough," Zara replied honestly, "though I don't remember being quite this tired with Will." "Each pregnancy is different," Jenny said wisely, "and you're not as young as you were." "I'm only 27, Zara protested with a laugh. "Ancient," Jenny agreed solemnly, then broke into a grin. "Come inside and put your feet up. The men can watch the boys while we have tea and catch up." Inside, the house was cool and comfortable, with windows open to catch the spring breeze. Photographs adorned the walls. Daniel and Zara on their wedding day, Will as a newborn, family gatherings at holidays, and one special image of the three of them standing beside the repaired wagon that had first brought Zara to Bisbee. They had kept the wagon, storing it in the barn as a reminder of their unusual beginning. Daniel had completely rebuilt the wheel that had broken during the storm, making it stronger than before, a metaphor neither of them missed for the unexpected blessings that had come from that initial misfortune. As they settled in the kitchen, Jenny updating Zara on town gossip while preparing tea, Zara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young woman who had left Boston seeking independence could never have imagined the life she would build in the Arizona territory: a loving marriage, a thriving home, a child with another on the way, deep friendships, and roots that grew stronger with each passing year. "Penny for your thoughts," Jenny said, setting a cup of tea before her. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I imagined when I first came west," Zara replied, "in the best possible way." Jenny smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes the plans we make for ourselves pale in comparison to what life has in store. Speaking of which," she glanced toward Zara's abdomen, "any feelings about whether this little one is a boy or girl?" Zara placed a hand on her rounded middle, feeling the gentle movement within. "Daniel is convinced it's a daughter this time. He's already talking about building her a dollhouse when she's old enough." "And you?" "I'll be happy either way," Zara said honestly, "though I admit a little girl would be lovely. Will is so much his father's son already." The sound of male laughter drifted through the open window. Daniel and Tommy engaged in some shared joke while Will clambered over both of them, demanding attention. The domestic tableau warmed Zara's heart, a physical manifestation of the love and connection that had grown from that stormy night 5 years earlier. Later, as twilight settled over the landscape, the extended family gathered on the porch to enjoy the cooling evening air. Will had fallen asleep against his father's chest, thumb firmly planted in his mouth despite recent attempts to break the habit. Tommy sat on the porch steps, whittling a small piece of wood with the same pocketknife his uncle had given him years before. Jenny and Zara rocked side by side in the chairs Daniel had crafted as a fourth anniversary gift. "You remember," Daniel said quietly, his voice pitched low to avoid waking Will, "that first night during the storm when you asked if it would pass soon?" Zara nodded, smiling at the memory. "And you said not tonight and offered to let me stay until it was safe." "Little did I know," Daniel continued, his eyes warm as they met hers, "that safe would become this our home, our family, this life we've built together." "I think perhaps I knew even then," Zara admitted. "Not consciously, but somewhere deeper. When you offered shelter, something in me recognized it wasn't just for that night, but for always." Daniel reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. The simple gesture, familiar after 5 years of marriage, still sent a current of warmth through Zara's veins, a reminder of the connection that had begun with a broken wagon wheel and a lightning storm, and had grown into the greatest blessing of her life. As night fell fully, stars appearing in the vast Arizona sky just as they had on that first evening, Zara Lawson looked at her sleeping son, her kind-hearted husband, their extended family, and the home they had created together. The journey from Boston schoolteacher to frontier wife and mother had been unexpected in every way, filled with challenges and joys she could never have anticipated. But sitting here on the porch of the home she shared with Daniel, surrounded by the family they had built together, Zara knew with absolute certainty that when her wagon had broken in that long-ago storm, it had not been misfortune at all, but destiny leading her exactly where she was meant to be.